Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Is that okay? Good. Um, Thank you so much, Dom. I really appreciate your extremely gracious introduction. Thanks so much. It's really been a joy to get involved with the London Trollop Society. We had lots of fun at that wreath laying lunch. That was lovely. So today, I actually wrote a new lecture for today. I got so involved in the Vicar of Bullhampton, which I actually hadn't read since I was pregnant with my first child, and it took me an entire year to read it after he was born. And so it was wonderful to just sort of whiz through it this time, as a grandmother, to sort of, it was wonderful. I had so many different thoughts about Trollope and how this book connected to other Trollope novels that I decided to write about it. And so that's why I'm here today. And I'll be talking to you about the other story of fallenness in The Vicar of Bullhampton, the rise of Mary Lowther and the fall of Harry Gilmore. In an autobiography, Trollope writes, The Vicar of Bullhampton was written chiefly with the object of exciting not only pity but sympathy for a fallen woman, and for raising a feeling of forgiveness for such in the minds of other women. I could not venture to make this female the heroine of my story. To have made her a heroine at all would have been directly opposed to my purpose. It was necessary, therefore, that she should be a secondary personage in the tale, but it was with reference to her life that the tale was written, and the hero and heroine, with all of their belongings, were all subordinate. Trollope began The Vicar of Bullhampton on June 15th, 1868, just 3 days after he completed He Knew He Was Right. And to my mind, Trollope is still thinking about ideas of male dominion and the denial of female desire that inform that earlier novel. He Knew He Was Right traces the dissolution of an initially loving marriage in great part because the husband, Louis Trevelyan, must assert absolute control over his wife, Emily. By the end of this long novel, the narrator calls Louis a madman as he isolates himself with his legally kidnapped little son in a lonely villa located in a desiccated Italian landscape. On his deathbed, Louis finally pronounces that he does not think his innocent wife is a whore, although even this absolution is tentative. In resistance to Lewis's destructive marital tyranny, Trollope creates several gentler, more loving men in his novel, most strikingly the penny newspaper writer Hugh Stanbury, Lewis's best university friend, who believes that men shouldn't tell women what to do, and that marriage is more about the loving than being loved. Yu's more affectionate and equal marriage to Emily Trevelyan's sister, Nora, is explicitly meant to be viewed in tension with the disastrous Trevelyan marriage, as scholars since Trollope doyenne Ruth Ap Roberts have argued. I'm going to argue that it matters very much that during this period, Trollope was thinking about issues of male mastery and female desire. He was pondering why male needs and desires are taken so seriously, and why women's needs and desires are so very often repressed or even dismissed entirely. In part, as I argue in my book Reforming Trollope, this focus upon gender inequities reflects the accretive influence upon liberal Trollope of Victorian women's struggle for education, marriage, and voting rights. Another influence upon Trollope was his close friendship with the beautiful American feminist, lecturer, journalist, and actress, Kate Field, whom he had just seen when he was finishing He Knew He Was Right and beginning The Vicar of Bullhampton in New York. They visited often during Trollope's sojourn there under the aegis of his final employment for the London Post Office. Trollope and Kate even got their photographs taken, possibly together, as Victoria Glendinning tells us in her wonderful autobiography. The strong minded, vibrant Kate, eventually Trollope's best friend, outside of his family, as he states in an autobiography, is surely an influence upon the character of Mary Lowther. Mary is so long suppressed by her friends at Bullhampton and guardian Aunt Marrable in Loring that the vibrance she shows with Walter, both in person and in her letters, is not often mentioned in discussions of the Vicar of Bullhampton. But it is there nevertheless, once Mary frees herself at last from the thrall of Harry Gilmore's possessiveness, from her sense of obligation to her best friends Janet and Frank Fenwick, and to her beloved but misguided aunt, and from her own morbid ideas about having to sacrifice herself out of a sense of duty in an unloving, distasteful marriage with a man she can eventually barely stand to touch. I myself have written about Trollope's great friend Kate Field as a precursor to idealistic, talented Ayala in Ayala's Angel and Quicksilver, intelligent Isabel Boncassen in The Duke's Children, but I am fairly certain that with Trollope having been so recently in Kate's presence, she is in his mind as he creates Mary Lowther. And although I love and revere Trollope's creation of the vicar himself, Frank Fenwick, in all of his intelligent, tolerant, Christian manliness, and with all of his pugnacious and loving nature, so like Anthony Trollope himself, I am most struck in rereading The Vicar of Bullhampton by the character of Mary Lowther. The representation of Mary's mind, of her thinking about all of the ins and outs, of her desires and her obligations, is what fascinates me about this novel. It does not surprise me that Henry James, in whose works the representation of consciousness is so important, admired this novel very much and wrote in Partial Portraits that The Vicar of Bullhampton was a capital example of interest produced by the quietest conceivable means. If the interest is gradual, it is extreme and constant, and it comes altogether from excellent portraiture. However, of the scholars who have written on this novel, and there aren't very many actually, only Jeff Franklin, in our Routledge research companion to Anthony Trollope, within an essay about religious heroes in Trollope that focuses upon Frank Fenwick, seems to concur with my own intense admiration for Mary Lowther. He writes, the novel ultimately shows the Fenwicks and Gilmore to be wrong and Mary to be right, in not marrying for practicality, but rather for heartfelt love. Trollope created Mary as one of the most self-reflective and self-determining of his characters, with clearer vision than any of her elders, and in certain ways, she is the real hero of this novel. The great Trollopian James Kincaid judges The Vicar of Bullhampton to be one of Trollope's darkest, and also one of his best, novels. He distinguishes it from the Barsetshire novels because of this darkness, in tension with the expectation of the gentle comedy, that's his phrase, of Trollope's first novel series of the rural English countryside. The title, The Vicar of Bullhampton, might well lead the reader to expect a kind of Framley parsonage, but Kincaid argues that what we get instead is a kind of anti-pastoral, despite Fenwick being one of the most attractive and skilled of Trollope's gardeners. Part of this darkness surely issues from the Brattle plot, with the fallen, sorrowing Carrie, the rebellious, wrongly accused Sam, and their miserably intransigent, fiercely pagan Father Jacob. Another related kind of darkness Trollope is exploring, in conjunction with his fallen woman tale, is the story of a woman who feels strong erotic desires that are considered unimportant by everyone except herself and her true lover. The narrative centering upon orphaned, beautiful, high-minded Mary Lowther. There is an incremental darkness as well in the character of Harry Gilmore, whose desire transforms into a kind of crude will to possession of Mary, no matter the cost to her body and soul. Indeed, Kincaid decides that at the novel's close, Gilmore goes into some ugly, self-perpetuating sulk, not simply nursing his wounds, but letting them define him permanently. Biographer Victoria Glendenning remarks upon the two plots that much more significant than the Carrie Brattle plot for the development of Anthony's understanding of women was the subtle depiction in the book of a suitable marriage as no less degrading for a woman than Carrie's prostitution of herself. Scholar P.D. Edwards suggests that the novel unconsciously wishes us to transfer to Mary part of the sympathy it arouses for Carrie, and this may account for some of the superfluous pathos that surrounds Carrie. In any event, this linking of the two major plots of The Vicar of Bullhampton defies one of the contemporary reviews of Trollope's novel, the unsigned notice in the Saturday Review of May 1870, in which the writer claims that Vicar is a story without a plot, and not only without a plot, but one showing no connection whatever between the two trains of events and two groups of characters which occupy its pages. In another contemporary review of The Vicar of Bullhampton, also in May 1870, in the issue of Blackwood's Magazine, the novelist Margaret Oliphant laments Trollope's departure from the more simple and innocent heroines of Barsetshire to Mary Lowther, who, she deplores, can engage herself to a man she cares nothing for, only months after the end of her engagement to the man she loves. I would resist Oliphant's judgment in arguing that it is this very complexity of consciousness that builds upon one of the most brilliantly thoughtful of Trollope's Barsetshire heroines, the Rosalindian Lucy Robarts of Framley Parsonage, whose speculations about desire and duty in relation to her beloved Lord Lufton anticipate Mary Lowther's sometimes tortured consciousness of quelled desire, and presage Glencora's and Madame Max's most consequent representations of mind in the later Palliser novels, Phineas Redux and The Prime Minister. Indeed, Mary Lowther early on identifies Rosalind as her favorite heroine, because from the first moment of her passion, she knew herself and what she was about, and loved her lover right heartily. As I think about all of Trollope's great canon, I am not sure there is any novel in which a woman's consciousness is given more respectful attention than is bestowed upon Mary Lowther. Quite obviously, I resist the evaluation of the unsigned contemporary review in the Times, which calls The Vicar of Bullhampton a nice, easy, safe reading book for old ladies and young ladies, though we can imagine some of the latter class may be terribly provoked at Mary Lowther's high principle. It is, however, the very crux of the matter that Mary is constantly reminded that her duty to please Squire Harry Gilmore, a man she does not love, but who desires her and can afford to marry, is more important than her own passionate love for another man, her cousin Captain Walter Marrable, who for much of the novel is not in a position to marry her because his father has taken his maternal inheritance. It is Mary herself who ultimately trusts both her reason and her love, her emotional intimacy and sexual attraction to Walter Marrable, and her feeling of horror at the idea of being Harry Gilmore's wife. Let's pause for a moment on this word horror. Doesn't sound very Trollopian. That Trollope's narrator uses to describe Mary's feelings about her approaching union with Harry Gilmore. Trollope uses the same word, horror, in The Duke's Children, written in 1876, but published in 1880. The final Palliser novel, when Lady Mabel Grex explains to Lord Silverbridge why she thought she could bear to marry him, a friend since childhood, even though she loves Francis Tregear. Mabel has broken off her tacit engagement to Tregear because her father, Earl Grex, and brother Percival have taken all of her money, and Tregear must make his way in the world. She finds she cannot change her love, however, and declares to Silverbridge, whose proposal she has at first refused and then belatedly encouraged only when he is in love with another woman, Isabel Boncassen. But I have liked you so well, so much better than all the others. A dozen men have asked me to marry them, and though they might be nothing until they made that request, Then they became things of horror to me. But you were not a thing of horror. Later, in her final interview with her beloved Tregear, now happily engaged to Mary Palliser, Mabel laments that other men are abhorrent to her. No one, of course, tells either of Mary's lovers that they should marry without desiring and loving their future wives. That both Harry Gilmore and Walter Marrable should be sexually attracted to the wives they marry is an unquestioned assumption. The closest anyone comes to instructing one of Mary's lovers to desire someone other than Mary is Walter's uncle, Sir Gregory Marrable's tacit but recognized wish that Walter Marrable marry his favorite niece, the attractive and true-hearted Edith Brownlow, who responds to Walter's tale of his love for Mary with the wise and unselfish advice not to believe anything that does not come directly from Mary herself. Walter also tells Sir Gregory that he loves Mary Lowther and will marry her, after which Sir Gregory gets a headache and defers committing himself to a definite course of action with Walter. I actually found this to be rather comic, but I am not sure whether Trollope is playing on the trope of the woman getting a headache to avoid sex or not, in the face of such committed male desire as Walter Marrable's for Mary Lowther. But ultimately, the elder man does not cut off his nephew, Walter's inheritance, as heir to the baronetcy and to the Dunripple estate. Perhaps one of the most surprising elements in this novel is all the bad and simply misguided or poorly informed advice that older relatives and friends give to Mary Lowther and to Walter Marrable. Aunt Sarah Marrable cautions Mary against her love for Walter and repeats unconfirmed gossip that leads Mary to think that Walter is about to become engaged to Edith Brownlow. Uncle John the parson, younger brother of Sir Gregory, does the same, telling what Mary later terms fables to Walter Marrable. It almost seems at times as if these celibate older relatives in particular do not understand and certainly do not sympathize with the natural sexual desires of their young relatives, and that they may indeed be unconsciously subverting these desires. In an extremely satisfying scene after Walter and Mary's rapprochement through letters and decision to marry, no matter what the results of Sir Gregory's deliberations, Mary explains to her skeptical aunt, "When I was so very wretched, I thought I would do my very best to comply with other people's wishes. I got a feeling that nothing signified for myself. If they had told me to go into a convent or be a nurse in a hospital, I would have gone. I had nothing to care for, and if I could do what I was told, perhaps it might be best." "But why did you not go on with it, my dear?" "It was impossible after Walter had written to me." "But Walter is to marry Edith Brownlow." "No, dear aunt, no. Walter is to marry me." An equally satisfying scene, narrated just afterwards between Walter and his Uncle John the parson, shows Walter's faithfulness to Mary in the face of Uncle John's assurance to him that "I don't suppose it likely that he, Uncle Gregory, will bestow that which he intended to give you as a reward to you for following his wishes." To which Walter replies, "He can do as he pleases." The moment that it was settled, I told him. Uncle John intones gravely, "Then it's all up with Dunripple with you, as long as Sir Gregory lives." Mary, too, has suffered and grown through the past year of her anguished love. She tells her aunt, "And I know myself better than I did then. Though it were to be for all my life, I would wait." Both she and Walter have realized that they love each other so dearly that they cannot part. "Then we must wait, and this time we must be patient," she said when he told her of poor Sir Gregory's headache. "I cannot ask him for anything," Walter responds. There follows a sweet, erotic scene in which Walter laments not getting to possess Mary, the sweetest grapes in the world, immediately. "I want my grapes at once," Walter declares, to which Mary rejoins unashamedly, "And so do I," said Mary eagerly. "Of course I do. I am not going to make any pretense with you. Of course I want them at once. But I have come to learn that they are precious enough to be worth the waiting for." As Mary has written to Walter earlier in response to his letter asking her again to marry him, so come to me as soon as you can, and I will never send you away again. I have not been happy once since we parted. It is easy for people to say that they will conquer their feelings, but it has seemed to me to be quite impossible to do it. I shall never try again. During most of the novel, Mary is indeed entreated to conquer her feelings in order to satisfy Henry Gilmore's passion. She is increasingly uncomfortable with her role as his fiancée, having accepted him at last after telling him she not only did not love him, but that she loved another man. In the chapter ominously titled Mary Lowther's Doom, in which Mary at last engages herself to Harry Gilmore, she thinks, after what he had said, after what she had said, he could not but recall his offer. How is it possible that he should desire to make a woman his wife after such a declaration as that she had made to him? And now he said, it is for me to decide. Yes, Mr. Gilmore, it is for you to decide. Then said he, coming up to her and putting out his hand, you are my betrothed. May God in his mercy soften your heart to me and enable to give me some return for all the love I bear you. She took his hand and raised it to her lips and kissed it, and then had left the room before he was able to stop her. This is perhaps the last scene in which Harry Gilmore may have any of the reader's sympathy and respect. He is self-abasing to accept the terms Mary offers, to want to marry a woman who declares she passionately loves another man, but he seems at least to intend to be kind and loving. It is, however, telling that it is Harry who makes the decision, Harry who accepts the proposal, in a reversal of the usual gender roles. Mary accepts him afterwards with a gesture that is usually performed by a man, the kissing of a hand, rather than a woman. And after this scene, Mary is almost never able to touch Harry without cringing and increasingly tries to avoid him. His enforced love becomes a terrible burden to her. When she is pressed for an early day, she insists that Harry has promised to give her time, to which the vicar comments to his wife, she speaks of it as though she was going to be hung. With this single phrase, Trollope captures the sense both of dread and of wrongdoing that Mary is experiencing as she contemplates her approaching marriage to a man for whom she feels no desire. Meanwhile, Harry's expectations that Mary will act like a betrothed woman in love with her fiancé lead to the beginnings of his perhaps at first unconscious cruelties. He resents her lack of affection, even though she has told him her heart belongs to another man. But when he was with her, there was a something in his manner which always seemed to accuse her in that she, to whom he was giving so much, would give him nothing in return. He did not complain in words. He did not willfully resent her coldness to him. But he looked and walked and spoke, and seemed to imply by every deed that he was conscious of being an injured man. Despite Mary's despairing remark to Janet Fenwick about Harry that there will never be a spark of sympathy between us, there is a brief rapprochement when Harry has his mother's magnificent set of rubies reset for Mary. Although Janet calls this act noble, it does seem to me to be more a buying of Mary with expensive material objects, as well as a kind of fairy tale fantasy that she will be a loving wife like his mother, if only she wears his mother's jewels. There are so many jewel scenes in Victorian novels, the most famous being Miss Havisham's bestowing of diamonds upon unfeeling Estella in Dickens' Great Expectations. Grandcourt's present to his fiancée Gwendolen Harleth of family jewels reclaimed from his mistress in Eliot's Daniel Deronda, and Angel Clare's gift of his mother's jewels to Tess on their ill-fated wedding night in Tess of the D'Urbervilles. That I am very wary of scenes in which a person with money and status encircles the neck of a woman with family jewels. Harry Gilmore's mother's rubies are not so darkly symbolic, perhaps, but they symbolize an unrequited passion rather than a passionate, fiery union. This scene occurs just after Mary has heard from her Aunt Sarah that Walter Marrable is to marry Edith. And Mary, influenced by her aunt's letter, has decided that she must marry Harry Gilmore and take care that he had good dinners. She would come down from that high pedestal which she had once striven to erect for herself. Mary then tries hard to be more physically affectionate, pressing Harry's arm. When Harry says, "If love will beget love, it seems that you must love me at last," Mary answers, "I will love you," pressing his arm still more closely. But even then, she could not bring herself to tell him that she did love him. This painful drama vividly contrasts with the first passage of love between Walter and Mary, when intimacy is acknowledged right away and sexual passion cannot be denied. When Mary asks that he sit down so that she can tell him how dearly she loves him, he threw himself at her feet and buried his face upon her lap. There were but few more words spoken then. When it comes to this, that a pair of lovers are content to sit and rub their feathers together like two birds, there is not much more need of talking. Before they had arisen, her fingers had been playing through his curly hair, and he had kissed her lips and cheeks, as well as her forehead. She had begun to feel what it was to have a lover and to love him. She could already talk to him almost as if he were a part of herself, could whisper to him little words of nonsense, could feel that everything of hers was his, and everything of his was hers. She knew more clearly now than she had ever done before that she had never loved Mr. Gilmore and never could have loved him. It is all of this passion that Mary Lowther is repressing with Harry Gilmore. When Mary finally refuses to deny her love for Walter anymore, Harry's passion becomes distorted, as the narrator tells us. As he walked about his own fields thinking of it all, he allowed himself to feel a certain amount of hope that after all she might be made to marry him. His love for her had not dwindled, or rather his desire to call her his own and make her his wife, but it had taken an altered form, out of which all the native tenderness had been pressed by the usage to which he had been subjected. It was his honor rather than his love he now desired to satisfy. The sense of possession indicated by the phrases "his own fields," "might be made to marry him," and "call her his own and make her his wife," demonstrate the dark alteration in Harry's love, which has become appropriating, punishing, even suggesting possible violence. This darkness reaches a climax in the final scene between Mary Lowther and Harry Gilmore. He quickly becomes urgent, declaring that "you might as well tell me that you would leave me even though you were my wife." Mary responds firmly, "But I am not your wife." Harry soon unfairly accuses her of base falseness. "You can stand there and look me in the face and tell me you are as false as that. You can confess to me that you will change like a weathercock, be his one day and then mine, and his again the next. You can own that you give yourself about, first to one man and then to another, just as may suit you at the moment. I would not have believed it of any woman. When you tell it me of yourself, I begin to think that I have been wrong all through in my ideas of a woman's character." Ultimately, Mary repeats the truth of their history together and her unchanging love for Walter, about which she has always been open and truthful. She asks, "If I were your sister, what would you have me do?" Harry then insults her, all but calling her a whore. "If you were my sister, my ears would tingle with shame when your name was mentioned in my presence." Of course, Mary leaves after telling Harry that she will never willingly speak to him again. Even after this scene, Harry writes a note to Janet before leaving her house to declare that if Mary will even yet consent to be his wife, he knows well that he will never have to blush for any action of hers. At this point, Harry seems to be living in a childish fantasy realm in which he feels that he somehow deserves to live the story he has read or to own the toy he has coveted for so long, and that it surely will not be denied to him because he wants it so very much. Harry will not accept the narrative of female desire because his own narrative of male desire demands compliance. As Geoffrey Franklin writes of Harry, Trollope has him squander the reader's sympathy for his heartache by becoming a maudlin stalker who tries to pressure a woman who does not love him into marriage. Ultimately, Mary refuses to be a victim and instead supplants Harry as one of the two characters, the other is Walter. Trollope's narrator explicitly identifies as the two heroes of his love plot. It is assumed that the Vicar of Bullhampton, Frank Fenwick, is the eponymous male hero of the novel as a whole, including not only the many scenes with the Brattles, and especially Carrie, but also of the comic subplot about the dissenting minister Puddleham, the Marquis of Trowbridge, and the chapel built on Glebland. However, it is important that Trollope introduces Harry Gilmore as a hero at the beginning of his novel and afterwards compares him to Walter Marrable upon the introduction into the narrative that other successful suitor for Mary Lowther's love. Trollope insists that Harry Gilmore is our hero, at least one of two. The author will not, in these early words, declare that the squire will be his favorite hero, as he will wish that his readers will form their own opinions on the matter. Nevertheless, there is a very positive description of Harry Gilmore at the novel's outset. The squire has perhaps given himself more credit than he has deserved for intellectuality, but he is a man with a good heart and a pure mind, generous, desirous of being just, somewhat sparing of that which is his own, never desirous of that which is another's. He is good-looking, although perhaps somewhat ordinary in appearance. Perhaps it is his greatest fault that he thinks that as a liberal politician and as an English country gentleman, he has combined in his own position all that is most desirable on earth. When introducing Walter Marrable, the narrator then states, "It was said in the first chapter of this story that Harry Gilmore was one of the heroes whose deeds the story undertakes to narrate, and a hint was perhaps expressed that of all the heroes he was the favorite. Captain Marrable is, however, another hero, and as such some word or two must be said of him. He was a better looking man, certainly, than Mr. Gilmore, though perhaps his personal appearance did not at first sight give to the observer so favorable an idea of his character as did that of the other gentleman. Mr. Gilmore was to be read at a glance as an honest, straightforward, well-behaved country squire, whose word might be taken for anything, who might, perhaps, like to have his own way, but who could hardly do a cruel or unfair thing. He was just such a man to look at as a prudent mother would select as one to whom she might entrust her daughter with safety." Now Walter Marrable's countenance was of a very different dye. He had served in India, and the naturally dark color of his face had become very swarthy. But no doubt he was a very handsome man. There is much to parse in these descriptions, but one thing we might say right away is that Trollope's narrator is doing what the Irish writer Frank O'Connor described long ago. His favorite device is to lead his reader very gently down the garden path of his own conventions and prejudices. and then to point out that the reader is wrong. This is not very like the behavior of a mid-Victorian gentleman. Harry Gilmore, like Louis Trevelyan, and he knew he was right, seems to be an ideal English gentleman. And yet, like Louis, he likes his own way. Louis likes his own way so much that he goes mad trying to prove he is right. Harry, too, in a less extreme but still dramatic fashion, ruins his own life and oppresses the woman he claims to love because he simply cannot bear not to have his own way. Harry allows his house alterations to be disrupted, treating the workmen cavalierly, and ultimately relying on his bailiff to run the estate. He leaves for London without saying goodbye to his best friend, the vicar, who follows him and insists upon a long interview in which Gilmore is judged even by his loving, tolerant friend to be unmanly in his public response to his private disappointment, in being, as the vicar says, overruled by misery. But Gilmore protests that a man can't walk if you take away his legs. If you break a bird's wing, he can't fly, be he ever so full of pluck. All that was in me, she has taken out of me. Harry blames Mary for his metaphorical inability to walk, to fly. He is indeed fallen, very far from that seeming perfection of English manhood, reminiscent of the English pearl, Louis Trevelyan, and he knew he was right, who is at last a haggard misanthropist. Harry leaves for the continent, relinquishing to others all of his duties to his neighbors and friends, and to those who work on Privets, his estate. The last words of the novel are hopeful, but not definite. Mr. Gilmore has been some years away from Bullhampton, but when I last heard from my friends in that village, I was told that at last he was expected home. We as readers are not privy to any possible further narrative of Harry Gilmore's rise from his dramatic fall. And that other dark hero, not as trusted by English mothers in relation to their daughters? Walter Marrable turns out to be as high-minded, faithful, and passionate as his great love, Mary Lowther. Walter, like Mary, tries to do what is right for her as well as for himself. She is the one who is convinced by others at first to let him go because it would not be well for him if he married her. And in true Trollopian fashion, Walter and Mary are rewarded for their love, not only with happiness and erotic fulfillment, but with material comfort as well. They do not have to wait to be married and to taste those luscious grapes. In Trollope's leave-taking of Mary Lowther, the narrator explains that he has endeavored to describe a young woman, prompted in all her doings by a conscience wide awake, guided by principle, willing, if need be, to sacrifice herself, struggling always to keep herself from doing wrong, but yet causing infinite grief to others and nearly bringing herself to utter shipwreck, because for a while she allowed herself to believe that it would be right for her to marry a man whom she did not love. It is through Mary Lowther's own deeds and words that she comes to an understanding of her own desires. She explains to her Aunt Sarah that she has even burned Walter's picture at one point and tossed his letters away. I would not have a scrap of his handwriting. But she cannot expunge the love in her heart for this man. As she tells Harry Gilmore in their final interview, You are unjust upon me, Mr. Gilmore, unjust and cruel. You know in your heart that I have not changed. When I accepted you, I had ceased to care what became of me. I do care now. I care very much. And we, as readers of Trollope's novel, care very much as well, and are very glad indeed that Trollope has written the story of Mary Lowther's rise to acknowledge the truth and authority of her own desires. Thank you.